Today, I'm going to explain a recently released and highly anticipated horror movie called Wolfman. This movie is a reboot version of the 2010 Wolfman. However, unlike the earlier film, which was a typical monster horror, this one focuses more on body horror. The film features many disturbing elements as well as emotional moments. So, without further delay, let's start the video. The story begins in Reagan, a state in the US about 30 years ago in 1995. Reagan is a hilly area with a village where a boy named Blake lived with his dad. Blake's mom had passed away earlier, so his dad was entirely responsible for him. Blake's dad was overly protective of him because there was a rumor in the area about a strange creature that looked like a human but wasn't. Recently, it had even attacked a hiker. Because of this, his dad was very strict and protective. As for Blake, he was just a child who saw only the beauty of the world around him, completely unaware of the dangers lurking in the shadows. One day, Blake's dad took him hunting. During the hunt, Blake got attracted to some mushrooms growing nearby and moved toward them. However, Blake didn't know the mushrooms were poisonous, but his dad did. He immediately stopped Blake and explained that these mushrooms were dangerous and should be avoided. Blake's dad went into detail to warn him about such dangers in the future, but Blake's attention remained on admiring the beauty of nature. His distraction earned him a scolding from his dad, who warned him that although the place seemed beautiful, it hid many dangers, so he should stay alert. A little while later, they spotted a deer. Blake's dad tried to shoot it, but the deer moved out of range. While his dad was focused on the deer, Blake sneaked away, thinking he could hunt the deer from another side. However, Blake didn't realize that in trying to hunt, he might become the hunted. Instead of spotting the deer, Blake saw a creature that looked human but made animal-like noises. Its terrifying voice echoed through the forest, and Blake was filled with fear. Just then, his dad arrived and grabbed him, scolding him harshly this time. Blake's dad was only trying to protect him, but at times, it was frustrating because Blake didn't even understand what danger to fear. If he feared anything, it was his own dad. Meanwhile, the creature was approaching them. Blake's dad quickly took him away, and they safely hid in a treehouse. Looking through his scope, Blake's dad saw the carcass of a deer on the ground, its stomach torn open. It was the same deer they had tried to hunt, but the creature had gotten to it first. Now it was after them. Blake's dad spotted the creature through the scope, and though he shot at it, the creature managed to escape. Blake, scared and trembling, asked his dad what it was. His dad lied, saying it was just a bear. Later, however, Blake overheard his dad talking to someone, admitting that the monster was real and he had encountered it that day. He vowed to do something about it to protect his son. The story then jumps 30 years ahead to the present day. Blake now lives in San Francisco and is a dad himself. He has a lovely daughter named Ginger. Like any father, his main goal is to protect his daughter, but not in the same way his dad did. Blake wanted to protect Ginger without treating her the way his dad had treated him. Ginger adored her dad, but one day, she pulled a prank that could have hurt her. In that moment, Blake lost his temper and, for the first time, raised his voice at Ginger. This made her cry. The next moment, Blake realized he was becoming like his own dad. Feeling remorseful, he apologized to Ginger and promised her that he would never yell at her again. Blake had maintained a good bond with his daughter because his relationship with his dad had been far from ideal. Blake and Ginger even played a game where Ginger would guess what her dad was thinking. She would say, "You're thinking that you love your daughter very much," and Blake would respond, "That's exactly what I'm thinking, and don't forget about this game because it will come into play at the end of the story." Here, I should also mention that Blake was a part-time writer, so he mostly worked from home. As for his wife, her name was Charlotte. Charlotte worked at a news channel as a reporter. She was always busy and didn't have much time to spend with her family, which had created a gap in her relationship with Blake. Charlotte loved her family and wanted to spend time with them, but her work made it nearly impossible. Blake received a letter one day informing him that his father, who had disappeared years ago, had been declared officially dead. Blake's father had gone out to kill the monster and never returned, leading to his disappearance. Years later, the police confirmed his death and sent Blake this letter. Despite not having a good bond with his dad, Blake felt deeply upset after hearing this news. At that moment, Blake decided to visit his old family house with his family. He hoped that this trip might help improve the bond within their own family. Charlotte agreed with the idea and decided to take a break from work to spend time with her family. She felt guilty for not doing as much for Ginger as other mothers do and thought she wasn't a good mom. She shared this feeling with Blake, who reassured her that she was a great mom. So, Blake set off for his village with his family, hoping for a fresh start. However, upon reaching the village, Blake couldn't find his house because it had been 30 years since he last visited, and the place had changed significantly. To make matters worse, there was no internet connection in the area, so they couldn't use maps to navigate. Just then, they noticed a man standing in a treehouse in the distance. The man noticed them too and began walking toward them with a gun in hand. Seeing this, Charlotte panicked and urged Blake to leave the place, saying the man had a gun. Blake calmed her down, explaining that in this area, it was common for people to carry guns. As it turned out, the man was Derek, Blake's childhood friend. Derek recognized Blake and helped guide them to his house. During the journey, it became night, and they were close to Blake's house when something suddenly appeared in front of their car. This caused an accident, flipping the car over. Derek panicked and opened the car door to get out, but their car was perched on a height. As soon as Derek opened the door, he fell out and was attacked by the creature. The rest of them tried to escape through the windows. Charlotte and Ginger managed to get out, but before Blake could escape, the creature attacked him too, injuring his hand. Blake somehow managed to escape, and they all ran to a nearby house, which turned out to be Blake's old family home. Blake quickly led everyone inside the house to escape the creature chasing them. Once inside, they realized the house had no power, and both Charlotte and Ginger were terrified. Blake searched for a flashlight and used it to locate the generator, which he turned on. Afterward, Blake checked the window and saw that the creature had left. Charlotte, still shaken, was confused and had no idea what kind of creature this was. Blake admitted that he had never seen anything like it before. He described it as some sort of animal, but when he saw it before the accident, it was standing on 2 legs, which was unusual. Charlotte insisted that they were in serious trouble and couldn't face this alone. She suggested they needed help but didn't know how to get it. Blake then remembered his dad's old radio. They tried to match its frequency to contact someone outside, but it didn't work. Suddenly, strange things began happening to Blake. He noticed his teeth falling out, and his hand was bleeding. In the midst of all this, he completely forgot about the injury he had sustained during the car accident. Blake believed his hand had been cut by the car window glass, but Charlotte disagreed. She said the wound didn't look like a glass cut. It looked like the creature had scratched him. Charlotte bandaged his wound, and then she took Ginger to bed. Meanwhile, Blake was busy blocking the main door when he suddenly heard the sound of an animal walking, extremely loud and unsettling. Despite the intensity of the sound, Charlotte and Ginger continued to sleep peacefully because they couldn't hear it. Only Blake could. Blake decided to follow the sound to figure out where it was coming from. When he finally tracked it down, he was shocked to discover that it was just a spider moving inside a cupboard. The sound was amplified because Blake's wolf-like transformation had begun. Just like how children's baby teeth fall out to make way for adult teeth, Blake's teeth were falling out to make way for wolf-like fangs. His hearing ability had also significantly increased, allowing him to pick up even the faintest sounds. For Blake, all of this was strange and terrifying. For a moment, it felt like his head might explode. Somehow, he managed to calm himself down and decided to use his newfound abilities to his advantage. He could now hear the wolf outside. Blake went to the door and placed his ear against it, listening closely. Just then, the wolf grabbed his leg from underneath the door. Charlotte, seeing her husband in danger, immediately grabbed an axe and used it to drive the wolf away. Blake had narrowly escaped the wolf's attack, but the infection from the creature had already started taking a toll on him. His condition was deteriorating rapidly. He could no longer hear Charlotte and Ginger clearly. Their voices sounded strange and distorted. He couldn't understand their words and had even lost his ability to speak like a human. Charlotte realized that Blake had been infected by the creature. Blake also understood that something was seriously wrong with him and that he might not survive. Overwhelmed with fear, he lost control and soiled himself. Seeing this, Charlotte comforted him. She brought him a pen and paper so he could write down what he wanted to say. Blake wrote, "I'm dying." Charlotte tried to reassure him, saying, "That's not true. You're just sick." "You'll get better." But Blake couldn't comprehend her words. Everything sounded distorted, and now his vision was also becoming blurry. He began seeing them with glowing eyes, almost like night vision. Additionally, his hair was falling out in clumps. For Blake, this entire experience was horrifying. Seeing her father in such a state, Ginger became scared and asked her mother what was happening to him. Charlotte comforted her, saying, "There's nothing to worry about. Your dad is just sick. We'll take him to the doctor in the morning." Just then, Charlotte noticed that blood was dripping from Blake's hand. She immediately sent Ginger to another room and removed the bandage from his hand. What she saw left her horrified. The flesh on Blake's hand had rotted away, likely due to the infection. Blake was in so much pain that he began scratching at his exposed flesh and even biting into it. Dogs and wolves often do this to manage their pain, and seeing Blake do the same left Charlotte in shock. She realized that Blake's condition was worsening rapidly, and there wasn't enough time to wait until morning. If he didn't get immediate help, she might lose him forever. Charlotte looked out the window and saw a car parked nearby. Desperate and left with no choice, she decided to take a big risk and try to get her family to safety using that car. However, as soon as they got into the car, the wolf climbed on top of it, forcing everyone to abandon the vehicle and run. They found a nearby greenhouse and climbed on top of it to escape the wolf. The wolf entered the greenhouse and began tearing through its roof. At one point, Ginger nearly fell through a torn section, but Charlotte managed to grab her just in time, saving her from a near-death experience. Since they couldn't stay on the greenhouse roof for long, Blake signaled Charlotte to take Ginger and run back to the house. Meanwhile, he distracted the wolf and led it away in another direction. Charlotte used this opportunity to safely return to the house with Ginger. When Blake returned, he was even more deformed than before. All his hair was gone, and his wolf-like fangs had fully emerged. His condition looked worse than ever, and suddenly he vomited blood. To Charlotte's horror, the vomit contained severed fingers. It became clear that Blake had bitten off and swallowed the wolf's fingers during their earlier encounter. The wolf-like transformation was now taking full control of Blake. He realized he could soon become a danger to his own family. Determined to protect them, he decided to leave. But as soon as he opened the door, the original wolf appeared, seemingly seeking revenge for its severed fingers. A fierce battle broke out between Blake and the wolf. At first, the wolf overpowered Blake, but in the end, Blake managed to rip its neck apart, killing it once and for all. This revealed that these wolves aren't immortal. They can be killed without a silver bullet. Another major revelation occurs when Blake notices that the wolf he just fought has the same tattoo on its hand that his father had. This means that the wolf was actually his father. His dad hadn't disappeared. He had become a wolf himself. This infection or disease had turned his father into a monster, and now his father had passed it on to him. Blake realizes that he, too, will transform into a monster like this and become a threat to his family. Understanding this, Blake leaves the house. As he steps outside, Blake begins feeling restless because his transformation is nearing completion. His jaw starts widening, his long, sharp claws emerge, and his body becomes covered in fur. Fully transformed, Blake now resembles his father, a wolfman. The beast inside him has completely taken over, and he instinctively heads back to attack his family. Charlotte, realizing that Blake has now completely turned into a monster and is a danger to them, doesn't open the door for him this time. She keeps a knife with her for protection. Blake somehow forces his way into the house. Despite his monstrous state, the human part of Blake is still fighting against the beast within. However, Charlotte perceives him as a threat and stabs him with the knife. Even then, Blake doesn't attack her. Instead, he tries to take the knife away from her. Taking advantage of the moment, Charlotte grabs Ginger and runs. The two of them hide inside a barn. While inside, Charlotte notices a bear trap and decides to use it to stop Blake. Blake eventually breaks through the barn door and gets inside. The barn is completely dark, and Charlotte hopes that Blake won't be able to see them. However, due to his night vision, Blake can see them perfectly. But even now, he doesn't attack them. As Blake moves toward them, his foot gets caught in the bear trap. Taking advantage of the situation, Charlotte quickly grabs Ginger and runs away. To free himself, Blake bites off his own leg and starts crawling on his knees to continue chasing them. Meanwhile, Charlotte and Ginger end up back at the same spot where everything began. They find their overturned car and Derek's severed hand nearby. They also find a gun there. Charlotte takes the gun and hides with Ginger in a treehouse. By now, dawn has broken. Blake, still pursuing them, climbs up to the treehouse. He gets close to them but doesn't attack. Blake had never wanted to become like his father, but despite his wishes, he had turned into the very thing he feared. He hated the idea that his own daughter, who once felt safest around him, was now terrified of him. Blake couldn't bear to live like this anymore. At this point, Ginger reads her father's thoughts and tells her mother, "Dad wants us to end this now," but Charlotte is unable to pull the trigger. No matter how hard she tries, she can't bring herself to shoot him. Blake, understanding this, provokes her, forcing her to take the shot. Unwillingly, Charlotte shoots Blake. In his final moments, Blake sees the same scenery that once made him happy as a child. Ginger, reading his thoughts one last time, realizes that Blake has finally found peace and accepted his fate. With that, Blake takes his last breath. Charlotte and Ginger, despite experiencing such a devastating tragedy, also come to terms with their fate. The story ends where it began, with the same scenery, symbolizing the cycle of nature, its beauty and cruelty. It reflects how nature gives life to children, while also passing down diseases or hardships from parents to their offspring, as shown in the movie. And that, friends, was the explanation of the Wolfman movie. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care and keep watching.